Can we really build a cabin for $0? That's the challenge my daughter threw at me. No budget, just using what we have laying around. We're talking about constructing a cozy, fully functional cabin in our backyard in the cold Danish winters without spending a dime, hopefully. We are not just putting up walls and a roof. This is Denmark. And we need to tackle insulation, heating, rain management, very crucial elements in our chilly climate. Neither of us have built anything like this before. So every step is a new catastrophe, of course, adventure. From dismantling old floorboards to using blown-over trees for the frame, we are diving headfirst into a whirlwind of creativity and problem-solving. Mostly problem-solving. Can we turn scraps and logs into a warm, inviting cabin? And why exactly are we trying to build a zero-budget cabin together? If we are going to pull this off, we need to develop some serious hustling skills. So, who is the biggest hustler between the two of us? If you have watched my channel before, thank you, first and foremost. Then you also know that I started building my woodworking shop in a horse barn from literally nothing and hustling my way up to having, let's say, a decent amount of tools in my little shed now, including a sawmill that I hope we will get some use of. I would call myself a solid wood hustler. But you don't know my daughter Julia yet, so stick around. Because a year earlier, it was a beautiful morning, at least that's how I remember it. The birds were chipping away, and I may have gotten coffee served on my bed. The mood must have been really good, because I allegedly said yes to building a cabin on zero budget. Julia had decided on a spot for the cabin and was out on the mover, clearing the spot. And I was just thinking about how to source materials, naturally, but also about the adventure we were about to embark on. One of the reasons I said yes was that this could be the thing that we would do together as adults. Julia was the architect of the project and had made drawings of the cabin. I later made a model of the cabin from those drawings, and that helped us find some practical issues with the design. We also watched other people build cabins, people like Bo Miles, who built a $50 junk cabin for his wife, while also tending to the little baby and seemingly running a marathon too. He seemed to have a lot of building materials stacked around on his farm on a scale that we didn't. I'm not exactly running a marathon, but I had started to get into the hustling mode. And when driving around in our area, I spotted a really old building. The owners were literally throwing floorboards out from the windows and onto the street. I looked the place up, and it was originally the local dairy in this area, where raw milk was turned into butter, cheese and dairy products. It was built in 1888 and was one of the older dairies in this area, so most likely the floorboards would be the original ones. We asked the owners about their plans with the boards, and they said it would help them if we could remove them. That was the first little victory towards a zero-budget cabin. We used the next few days sorting through the boards, removing the nails with this handy little reverse nail gun that actually shoots the nail out from the wood, and cutting off most of the damaged parts of the boards. Thank you for the boards, old dairy house owners. Thank you. But this was a small win in the big picture because we did not have anything to mount the flooring on. We watched Bo Miles just put some big rocks on the ground, and building your house on top of rocks has been common practice throughout history in many cultures and regions. I didn't have any big rocks laying around, and I think elevating the cabin from the ground level is pretty dang important in these rainy years we are probably looking into. So Julie's birthday was coming up, and I decided to give her a present for the cabin build, and I generously invited her to help pick it up. And it was not just because these concrete foundation blocks are heavy as f. I thought we could just have a little nice father and daughter. Okay, it is because they are heavy as f. I spent about 1,000 Danish crowns, yeah, that is what we call them, because it is the king's coins, so we call them crowns, on foundation blocks and some column cement. So technically the cabin is not free anymore. We also use tools, gas, electricity, time, etc, etc. So no matter what we do, it will never be free, and nothing is. But we try to spend as little of the king's taxed coins as possible, and that is the premise. If you already made an angry comment about the cost of tools and gas, please just leave it, don't delete it. I like to torture my brain trying to come up with a positive reply to comments from short-tempered, narrow-minded people, apparently. So the foundation blocks might be heavy because, you know, concrete is heavier than feathers. And I'm really looking forward to the much easier job of putting these into the ground because the soil here is really soft. Okay, the soil here on the slope down to the little lake is very, at least it should be. So it turns out that in the not so distant past, it was very normal to just bury demolished buildings on site as a quick and cost-effective way to clear the land. That probably explains why all these old bricks appear just 40 centimeters below the surface. There was another building on this property earlier, and I think we just found the remains of it. So we're building the foundation of the cabin with the feet into the remains of an old building on this place. I think that makes the foundation very solid, but it also adds an almost metaphorical aspect. We are not exactly standing on the shoulders of giants here, but we are literally building on a foundation of trash laid by our ancestors. Thank you, ancestors. I don't think it's necessary to put anything else than gravel down around these posts. But just to make it even sturdier, we are adding some quick setting cement. When you pour the dry mixture around the posts and add some water, it triggers a rapid hydration reaction. And if we were in an off-grid setting, like we are dreaming of, without any access to water, we could just put gravel over it and it would harden over time as the mixture would just absorb the moisture from the surroundings. Before all these engineered materials, our ancestors would have used a stone foundation with larger stones, small filler stones and clay and mortar. A bit like Bo Miles and his cabin, and certainly like the old barn here next to the cabin. It is built on big rocks. it is going to be quite the fun to build the maker barn on top of this foundation, or remove it, and getting a foundation made from big rocks approved by the city council. I can't wait to do that. With the foundation blocks in place, it is about time to figure out how to build the wooden base frame for the cabin. I think we're gonna need a lot of wood. So I remembered that my neighbor, who owned some of the forest around here, had given me a tree that had blown over in a storm a few years back. I started cutting some branches away from it over the winter, but I got away from it. So I told Julia about the tree that is literally lying just a 5-minute walk away from the cabin site, and we decided to go and take a look at it. So naturally, because it is just a 5-minute walk, I started up my old tractor to cover the distance, with the excuse that I needed to bring some equipment. Luckily, the tree was still there, now hidden by a lot of grass and bushes, so Julia got to work clearing up the entrance while I inspected the fallen tree. So, I think this is actually where the birth of the cabin truly begins. This log, the black alder, will be the base of it, and I chunk it out into 3-meter sections with my chainsaw, because 3-meter-ish is the length that I can cut on my sawmill. It's funny I'm thinking of the capacity of my sawmill when my far back ancestors could easily process any length with just an axe and of course a lot of determination. But we are just two relatively inexperienced cabin builders here, so we'll need all the help that we can get. So with a chainsaw, I managed to get 3 pretty straight logs from this trunk, and all the off-cut branches will probably also be building material, or maybe firewood to heat the cabin. The next day, we are back in the forest preparing to drag the logs out from this slope. A few years back, I built a log arch with a friend who knows how to weld it, because I really don't know how to weld. A log arch is a very simple construction. By using the balance point of the log and the lever principle to lift it off the ground, I have been able to move pretty big logs all by myself. This is much better than just dragging the logs over the ground like a lot of people do, because it is getting a lot of soil and small rocks and dirt into the wood. And when we have lifted the log from the ground, I usually secure it with a strap around the front to prevent from shifting when we are driving over uneven terrain. Black alder is a really heavy kind of hardwood, and I'm really happy to have Julia around here to help me with the transportation. This was not only the birth of the cabin, but also the birth of something I didn't see coming. And that was Julia's interest in milling up wood, but we'll get back to that. So I started milling up the black alder logs. But this wood is very dense and I quickly ran into a problem with the sawmill. Take a look and see if you can spot the issue. As you can see, the blade began to dive into the wood, creating an unwanted curve in the middle of the log. It's basically unusable. This problem can arise from various factors, such as incorrect blade tension or dull blades. I spent hours trying to adjust the blade myself, but eventually I called my blade supplier for advice. He suggested trying out a blade made from thicker metal. I got it mounted and I was really excited to see if it could cut straight beams from this tough black alder. I was recently interviewed by a Finnish plywood company and they asked me what I found so interesting about wood. And my reply was, interestingly enough, also related to milling of wood. I really enjoyed the different scents of different kinds of wood, the sweet smell of a pine log, the tangy scent of an oak log, the flavor of a Cuban cigar factory when you run a walnut log through the mill. I think I can trace my love for wood all the way back to my childhood when my father asked me to help him chop firewood. Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, it was perfectly fine to hand your 10-year-old an axe. I asked him later what kind of wood it was that we chopped, and he said it was mostly poplar. So, poplar is definitely not my favorite kind of wood, but I do have a relationship with it. But I have never even worked with black alder before. The structure of this wood is very close to oak, but the scent is quite different. A distinct earthy and a little sweet aroma, a bit of damp forest floor with some spicy undertones. This could easily become my new favorite wood. Julia helped me mill up the black alder logs, and I showed her how to use the sawmill, how to put tension on the blade, and all the basics of cutting up a log. We even watched Matrimona mill up logs together, and this would become a pretty good investment later. We milled the black alder logs into the dimensions 15 x 7.5 cm timber. These dimensions provide a strong and stable structural timber, ideal for foundational elements of the cabin. So we dragged the logs out from the forest, put them on the sawmill, and started milling up timber for the base frame. And almost immediately after milling the wood, we started building from it. Even my mother, who has absolutely no experience with or interest in woodworking, asked me if the wood didn't need to dry before I could use it. I think we need to take a little wood history lesson. This obsession with drying wood is a rather new thing. Furniture carpenters and timber framers have in most of woodworking history used wet wood to build from. And when I say wet wood, I mean green wood, fresh wood, wet wood. Let's call it wet wood. They were so skilled, they just accounted for the shrinking and the movement of the wood when constructing the furniture. So over time, the joints and fittings would just tighten up more. Timber framers, the guys building houses and structures from wood, still prefer wet wood. It's easier to shape wet wood, it is cheaper, and it is way more accessible. And when done right, having the wood drying in the position where it's supposed to be sitting can tighten the joints and make the construction stronger. Unfortunately, I'm not an experienced timber framer. I don't make the fancy joinery that I would like to make. The most fancy joints I'm currently making are half-lap joints, which is basically removing half of the materials on both pieces so they fit together. That's a pretty effective joint in many cases, and I'm using it a lot in this base construction. We slam the base together with big wood screws and wood glue, and we don't tighten it or screw it to the anchor posts in the ends yet, allowing it to move a little bit over time. It might be a simple start, but every sturdy cabin needs a strong foundation, and this is how ours begin, with a lot of these half-lap joints. One of the reasons is the length of the cabin is 5 meters, and our little sawmill can only cut up to 3.2 meters. I really should have bought that extension set. And another reason is that we don't have an unlimited supply of black alder, so I started to use the offcuts too, making the most of what we have. It is also a picture of the ingenuity that will carry us through the rest of this build. Julie had never really used a screwdriver before, but suddenly she found herself driving most of the 15 cm long wood screws into the base. We had some great days this summer building the base for the cabin. The weather was far from perfect, a lot of rain, but the work was filled with learning and laughter. Julia got used to a lot of different tools, like the screwdriver, the Makita circular saw, and she even tried her hand at the chainsaw a few times. There's nothing like the first time you see someone realize that they can handle a new tool with confidence. I guess like when I chopped firewood as a 10-year-old. Each cut and screw brought us closer together and also closer to our goal. And by the end of the summer, we had a fantastic, sturdy base for the cabin. In many ways, this end of our first major phase felt like a new beginning, setting the stage for the next step in our journey. This wasn't just a physical foundation, it was also a foundation of memories and skills inside both of us, our common story. The next step is putting insulation in place between the wood posts before we start putting the flooring in place on top. I figured we could use some pallet wood to rest the insulation on, so Julia got to work mounting some thin rafters along the beams, and then she is putting some pallet wood boards on the top with a bit of spacing for ventilation. This prevents moisture buildup in the future. I hope so. A big part of this build is what I call top management, because of the frequent showers from above, and it will only get worse. So we sorted through the floorboards. These boards are really solid with the tongue and groove intact on most of the boards. Who would throw these out? So after we had decided what boards to use, we gave them a quick cleanup using a small desktop thicknesser. This minor operation was challenging for this little machine. Still, we got the boards to a bit more uniform size and at the same time leaving some of the use marks on the wood from its previous life. Some of the charm of building with historic materials such as these is that this little cabin is getting deep roots into history and stories to tell those who visit. I think I identified some of the boards as peach pine and some were regular pine, which is way softer. We still needed to figure out where to get the wood for the cabin timber frame, but then I talked to one of my neighbors who had previously been in the Christmas tree business. He had a place with some old noble firs that had been used for producing greenery, and he was looking to get that area cleaned up. Still, it was only accessible briefly when the cornfield around it was harvested. And suddenly he called me and said that window was now, so I had a few days to harvest as much as possible before they would plow the field and make it inaccessible again. So I started up my old tractor, grabbed my chainsaw and drove off. So if you know me, and if you have watched this far in the video, I think you know me more than you would like, my sincere apologies, then you also know that getting logs is taking this guy some time. So while we wait for that, let's get the platform ready for actually building the cabin on. So for the next part, I only have footage from a GoPro camera, for reasons that will become obvious very shortly. I crashed my camera into the ground. We basically just reused some old insulation bats, put them on top of the pallet wooden slats, and then we topped it all off with a vapor barrier. Because of the cold climate here, it is a really good idea to insulate the cabin, starting with the part of the floor that is going to be inside the cabin. So the vapor barrier will prevent moisture from rising through the floor and down into the structure. Sounds like a good idea, but this is not to say that we are big fans of using these vapor blockers. That potentially also can trap moisture inside structures and in general also create an unhealthy indoor environment. We did a lot of study of moisture barriers versus breathable materials, and we'll discuss this in much more detail later. Seen from the outside, this is just some guy jumping on an old tractor and driving 10 minutes over to his neighbor's cornfield to pick up some logs. What's the big deal? But thinking back on it a little later, I think this was the moment when I realized something important. My father gave me this tractor. He died in 2022, and I'm just so happy he got to see the beginning of my journey with wood. When he was sick the months before he passed away, we would sometimes sit and watch videos from the Northmen together all evening. Especially the video grandfather reminded him of his own father when he was a kid. I still have a private playlist on YouTube with the videos we would watch. So driving out to this field on my own and also having his old chainsaw with me along with my own just gave me this journey through a spectrum of emotions. Mostly thankfulness of being able to do this and also having a part of my father with me in what I do, and that I'm being allowed to do this with my own daughter. So I got to the noble fir spot and started taking down a few trees closest to the field. You can see there aren't many big branches left on these big logs because they have been used to harvest greenery for Christmas for many years. These trees have already served their purpose, so I'm just happy that we can repurpose them meaningfully to build a cabin. Otherwise, they would probably just end up as waste or, in the best case, maybe be shredded into wood chips for gardening or to be used as fuel in a biomass burner. Noble fir is also known for its straight grain and low weight, so it's really optimal for timber framing or whatever it is called what I'm about to do. It's also pretty resistant to rot and pests, so I'm just glad that they can contribute to a cycle of sustainability. After putting them down, luckily out on the field, I started to remove whatever was left of branches and also cut up the logs into pieces that would fit on the sawmill. My homemade log mover can only take one log at a time, so I'm just having some mornings and some evenings where I'm driving back and forth with logs. Sometimes Julie came with me to help me prepare and load the logs. But then she shifted job and became the master of the sawmill. She started to mill the wood for the timber frame while I was going a bit back and forth with more logs. The important thing I realized was a profound sense of continuity and connection to my roots, and also a newfound meaningfulness with my work with wood. My father may not be here, but my daughter is. And someday out there in the future, she'll be building houses or cabins with the people that are important to her. And it started with this little cabin. Putting up a timber frame is a fairly easy job. It's basically just sawing the noble fir rafters to length, screwing them together in a square, and then raising those squares and screwing them together in another square. We're just making squares. Julia had a brilliant realization. Building a house is really nothing more than putting pieces of wood on top of other pieces of wood. And you start from the bottom and work your way upwards and outwards. And I'll have to give it to her. We started with a foundation, we made a structure on the foundation and made it into a platform by screwing floorboards on. Then we made a structure for the walls, and on top of those walls we put up some beams. Making a small cabin like this makes you realize that this is how most houses are built, big or small. Julia spent the last year diving into various community projects and outdoor challenges. She pushed her limits, learned new skills, and grew in ways I had never imagined. Her experiences ignited a passion for sustainable living and building, which she brought back home to this cabin. She wanted to build a cabin not just as a place for herself to stay, but also to build something together with me and learning how to use tools, but also for the spirit of community. This cabin will be a place where friends, makers, and anyone seeking a peaceful retreat can stay and connect with nature. Working on this project together, I have seen a new side of my daughter. Her determination, creativity, and willingness to learn have made me incredibly proud. It has really brought us closer together. Julia's journey has taught me and her that every end is a new beginning. This cabin is the culmination of her growth and our shared efforts. But it is also the start of many more adventures. It might be the end of part 1 of this build, but it's really just the beginning of something much bigger. I believe this cabin is part of a bigger plan, one that Julia might see more clearly than I do.